And welcome to this training. We are February 16th. Our training today is, a client found me on social media. Tonight, the podcast goes live and you will see it. If you're a night owl, you'll see it tonight. That's awesome. You can download the podcast. But this is the only place where you can get the screen shares and the interaction. So if you want to ask me questions, I will stop. I will answer your questions. If you're watching me and you're in the Facebook group right now, I'll keep an eye out and answer your questions there as well. All right. So number one, if you're going to have these questions about social media, I'm going to just throw it right back at you. I'm going to say, why are you on social media in the first place? And I'm asking that gently and with love because you have watched my previous podcasts where I talk about things like goals and key performance indicators. There is absolutely no need to use a marketing tool if you have no idea if it's actually working to improve your practice. And if you recall, some of the KPIs, key performance indicators that I mentioned include, additional phone calls. Does it increase the number of phone calls? Does it result in more opt-ins if you're trying to develop an email list? Does it result in more sales if you have an Etsy store full of printables for counseling tweens with ADHD? So you have these ways of measuring whether or not a certain campaign that you are doing. And what's a campaign? Well, we covered that in the editorial calendar. For the month of February, you're doing this. For the month of March, you're doing that. So if you are having difficulty with clients, and if you're watching this because you're like, oh crap, I did have somebody follow me, what do I do? Am I in trouble? Then go back and just make sure that you're in the place you're supposed to, not here. Of course, you're in the right place if you're watching this, but I mean, if you're in the right place because you're on Facebook, if you're in the right place because you're on Instagram, if you're in the right place because you're on TikTok. If you recall, I had an interview with Jody Halstead, who owns Ireland Family Vacations, and she determined that Instagram is not where her people are. They don't find her on Instagram. They don't follow her. They don't sell. They don't make sales from Instagram. And that's why she solely uses her podcast. That's where the majority of her sales comes from. And she is able to track that. And you can find my interview with her, the podcast and also the video. You can find the podcast on the podcast. The video is in your Kate Walker Training profile. So once you've answered those questions and you know why you're on social media, then you know that people who find you, they're going to love you, right? If they are already liking, commenting, sharing, hearting, doing all of the things to your amazing blog, podcast, Instagram pictures, and Facebook posts, they're probably going to continue once they become your client. So don't be surprised. Don't be shocked you're not in trouble. Right? That isn't a dual relationship until you make it one. And that is how we determine what our ethical boundaries we're trying to create, ethical boundaries we're trying to maintain, ethical boundaries with our clients who find us and follow us on social media. And so we have this beautiful piece of paper that determines when counseling begins, and it's your informed consent, or I call it the consent for treatment. And that is where we have the conversation about so many things, right? Everything from schedule to fee, to the exceptions to confidentiality, to how to make a complaint to the Behavioral Health Executive Council. We put so much into that informed consent that it's easy peasy to put in a social media policy. And if you've watched me before, you know I absolutely have been advocating for a social media policy for years because I used social media for my practice back in the day. I do not do that anymore. I use social media for this, for my Kate Walker training. But it is entirely possible to use digital marketing for your clinical practice. And I've got an expert next week. Craig Alsop is going to be talking to us and offering us a webinar, a live webinar, February 22nd at 5. If you're a Step It Up member and you don't want to go, don't worry about it, because Step It Uppers get the archived course, and you still get to have the CE as an online CE. It's going to be one CE for ethics. So whether you watch me live with Craig or you watch the replay with Craig, Step It Uppers will have the CE. So let's talk about the informed consent. Your informed consent needs to identify 3 things for this person who was your potential client, and now they love you so much and they interacted with your content and they found you and they liked you and now they're going to become your client. They need to know, number 1, social media is not a form of communication. It is a commercial. That's it. I mean, we just watched the Super Bowl, and I hope nobody in those commercials actually had a conversation with you. If they did, then you had too much of something, right? So nobody's having a conversation with you in a commercial. So why should your social media be any different? So with your clients, you wouldn't sit and have a conversation with them at the grocery store. You wouldn't sit and have a conversation with them at your local pub. So having a conversation with them out in the digital world should be as forbidden as that, or at least as avoiding those as a way of maintaining an ethical boundary. So explaining it, DMing, IMing, all of those things, those are how people can communicate. Gosh, somebody even called me like on Facebook, like there's a Facebook phone, I guess. I had no idea. I didn't answer it. Let them know you will not respond to communication through social media. All right. You see where I'm going here, right? Because number 2 is if you tell people that this person is my client, then I will ban you. I will delete you. I may take steps so that you're not my client anymore. So you can see where this happens with families and couples. Somebody comes to counseling, maybe they're pissed off at you, maybe they're pissed off because you're not doing something with their client, or maybe they get pissed off at their brother or their sister who's in counseling, and they go onto social media, they tear you up, they out the other person who is your client. You need to spell out specific consequences for that. And then number 3, you need to let them know that if they do communicate with you, you will ignore them. Now, before they were your client, you may have been interacting and liking and hearting, and thanks for the share, Joan. Thanks for the comment, Bob. Thanks so much, right? I mean, I do that. I thank people when they say nice things. I love it. Or at least I'll go through and thumbs up or heart or do whatever format wants me to say thank you. Thank you for noticing my post, because when you interacted with it, that put me up higher in the Instagram God feeds, and they put me in other people's faces. That's good. It translates into more phone calls for me. So my gain, this random person who's not my client, not theirs. But when this random person out there becomes my client, suddenly you have to remember when they interact with you, it's for your gain, not theirs. In fact, by them possibly revealing their identity as your client, or someone figuring out, I bet that's a client, that's not good for them, possibly. And so this step 3, letting them know, hey, before I would comment and I would thank and do all the things when you shared my stuff. Yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. In fact, you may notice that I like everybody else's, and it's crickets when it comes to you. Worst case scenario, if I think you're going to stick out like a sore thumb because you're the only one I didn't like, I'm going to delete the comment. So you need to know this up front, because I don't want this to become something between us where you're going to feel like I'm ignoring you or I don't like you. This is how I protect your confidentiality. This is how I protect the fact that you are my client. Now, if this is a newbie in counseling, they may say, I don't care. I want the world to know I'm your client. That's my gain, not necessarily theirs. Whose job is it to protect the ethical boundary? Mine. So I have to think ahead and say, I get that. Love it. Thank you so much. But I'm going to protect you out there. So let's screen share. And again, this shouldn't be anything new for a lot of people. Now, I apologize. This is a 2019 service agreement, and I tried to open up my 2021 and Adobe was being weird. And so when Adobe's weird, I go back to Word. So let's scroll down. Sorry. Vacuum cleaner noise. Can you hear that? Okay. All right. So because in my mind, I think of social media sharing like one of the biggest problems is communication. You know, if a client wants to outcry, if they have an emergency, right? Or if they want to contact me or somehow, everybody's just used to using social media as a form of communication. This is where I put my social media policy. I put it near where I talk about contacting me. So I'm very specific about how to contact me, when to contact me, and when not to contact me. I do not want to be one of the phone calls you make if you're having a crisis or an emergency. I want you to bypass me. I'll be the phone call you make later. But I make it very clear. This is when I answer. This is when I return calls. So please understand, I'm not going to talk to you this way or that way. And really what I'm telling my clients is the only time that we will talk is if we make a scheduled appointment or we're talking over the phone during business hours. But so that's where I start the conversation. And you can see right here on this bullet point, social media is not a means of communication. If you find me on social media, I will not communicate with you. Now I elaborate on that when I talk about Facebook and social media. So you can see this is a little bit dated because back when I did this, Facebook was the main thing. And obviously it's not the main thing. In fact, I found out today, TikTok's not the main thing anymore. How about that? So social media, including but not limited to Facebook and Twitter. I've never even used Twitter. I think I have a profile, but I just check it to make sure nobody's said anything. I don't know how to use it, are not secure in terms of privacy and confidentiality. So our policy regarding the use of social media includes the following. Number one, I do not provide therapy via social media. Number two, I will not acknowledge or return private messages delivered via social media. Number three, I will not acknowledge or respond to client emergencies delivered via social media. Now, this is harsh. Most of our social media platforms have a way to address emergencies through their system. And if we are diligent about knowing where our clients are located, sorry, that's noisy, then we are able to call 911 for that person. This is me, I'm going to own it. I'm not a legal professional and I'm not giving legal advice. I will not respond to emergencies via social media, but I have other means of handling that I will explain to my client. And so I lost my place. There it is. If you have an emergency, do not contact me via social media. Instead, go to the emergency room or call 911. And finally, you may use social media to reveal your own identity as a client of achievebalance.org, but you may not reveal the identity of another client. Doing so would be a breach of confidentiality, and achievebalance.org would take all available steps to protect that revealed client's rights, including blocking the offended client from accessing our social media, contacting legal authorities, and referring the offending client to another practice. So you may feel abandoned if I tell you bye-bye, but I've made it very clear in my informed consent, this is how I'm going to handle that. And I talk about this on the podcast when it goes live tonight. You must have this conversation with your outside voice, right? Especially depending on the population that you work with. Some of you guys work in populations and with populations that are highly emotional, dysregulated. And so that instance that I talked about earlier, if you're ignoring posts when you used to just be crazy about those posts, that can be jarring for your clients. And so having this conversation with your outside voice is great, but it doesn't necessarily stop things from going sideways. And so as you look at this, and I'm going to go ahead and leave it up for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. As you look at this, you get an idea that you are still your own worst enemy if you choose to break all of this. So, for example, if you have a client that's constantly going to use Facebook to outcry to you through DMing to the point where you can hardly go to the grocery store without checking your phone all the time, or you're sitting with your family and you're checking your Facebook and DMing and seeing if they're having another emergency, you've broken your own rule, right? So understanding that once this kind of slips and slides and goes sideways, you've got to take other measures, perhaps even legal measures. There's some great attorneys who work with counselors, some just with counselors, and they can help you understand, okay, you've got two alternatives, or, one is to keep this person and, you're going to be kind of at this, I kind of feel like you're on a leash, or you can terminate them and risk abandonment. And here are the consequences of that. I know that makes us all kind of verklempt, but you guys are awesome. You don't deserve to be on a leash, and you don't deserve a complaint. So as you kind of dig down and think, okay, I want to use social media. These are things that might happen. Kate's giving me the worst case scenarios because that's what the title was today, right? Something's gone wrong. Goodness knows this does not happen all the time, but this could happen with any client. I know I had a couple client once, and I've probably shared this before, and one partner was really not liking the advice that I was giving, and to the point they got up and walked out of the room and slammed the door and never came back. And the next thing I know, I've got this scathing Google review, right? So, you're going to have instances where things go sideways on social media, just like you would in real life, right? This isn't anything different. It's just a lot scarier because the internet feels so far away and so hard to control. So please understand, you may have to choose one of those. If you do, just get great legal advice. There are professional organizations out there that give you free legal, which is wonderful. Your malpractice insurance will give you great advice. And then, of course, we've got some wonderful attorneys, some that I've brought on to speak, Laura Clement out of Dallas, Kenda Dalrymple out of Austin, and they can help you if you find yourself in a predicament where you have broken your own policy and now you're kind of locked in. So let me pause there. I'm going to make sure broke your own rules. Okay. Let me talk real quickly. Somebody asked about, because I know in the Badass group on Monday, I asked everybody to find their Google My Business. And then my amazing photographer, Kaylee, said, I'm going to get my clients to give reviews. Well, she's a photographer. She can get her clients to give reviews. We're counselors. We don't do that. So what the homework was to give your Google link to a colleague who could honestly say they had seen you speak or teach or facilitate a group, seen you in action, and then they could write a great review. Well, the flip is, what if one of your clients gives you a scathing review? A lot of times with social media, those reviews, they kind of live there forever. I know with Google, Facebook, you can't just go in and delete a bad review. So what you have to do is get those colleague reviews, and then it won't make the bad review go away, but it will help it sort of disappear to the bottom, and then the ratio of good will outweigh the one bad. So I talk about that more in I got a bad Google review, and you can find that on YouTube, I believe, and possibly even in this group. So just go back through the archives, go back through your course and look on YouTube, and maybe we can do a training on that as well. Again, if you aren't planning to go to see Craig Alsop Wednesday, grab that replay, because he talks about claiming your practice on Google My Business, how to use that get a Google review link, and how to give it to folks that can review your work, so that you never ever solicit from clients. If they post a review out there, You can have that in your informed consent, right? If you give me a Google review, thank you. I hope it's great. I will not acknowledge it. I'm not going to thank you for it. It's going to be out there, and it'll be like I never saw it, but of course you'll see it. All right, guys, I'm going to hit the stop button and take questions. So thank you guys for watching. Don't go anywhere. I'm just hitting the recording stop. Okay, I'm going to stop recording. Oh, at the same time, the vacuum stopped. Good.